By the end of this century, China's population could fall to less than half its current state. Demographic problems may lead to socioeconomic problems and could hamper Beijing's global aspirations. OSW analyst Michał Bogusz tells us how China got here and what might happen next. On January 17th, the National Bureau of Statistics of China published new data on China's demographics. For the second year running, the population fell. In 2023, China's population fell by around 2 million. If we want to understand why, we need to go back to the mid-1900s. Between 1958 and 1962, China implemented Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward with the aim of turning the communist state into an economic powerhouse. Instead, it caused a great famine which killed as many as 50 million people. The next decade saw the birth rate bounce back, similar to what happened in Europe after the Second World War. 270 million children were born in China up to 1971.
This is nearly 30 million births a year. It's a very large cohort born across the decade, so they enter into their adult lives from the mid-1980s to the end of the 1990s. But the government saw that something was happening at the end of the 60s, that they were dealing with a genuine demographic explosion, and they introduced the first policy limiting the number of births. They launched the 2 children in a family policy in 1971.
But the communist government were not satisfied with the results.
It's not completely successful. A lot of children were still being born. And at the beginning of the 80s, precisely 1979, the one-child policy was gradually introduced over the beginning of the 80s. This caused a sudden decrease in births and the fertility rate, which had actually already been slowing down. But it led to a situation where the cohort born in the 60s entered the labour force from the mid-80s to the early 90s. These people are obviously responsible for the economic boom in China. There are very many of them. They're ready to work at low cost. At the same time, the international situation is favourable. There's an economic boom, there's globalization, foreign investment is coming in, Western companies are appearing. It's these who are really responsible for the phenomenal growth in China seen in the last decades. But this generation wasn't replaced because, as we've said, in the decade of the Great Baby Boom from 1962 to 71, nearly 30 million children are born each year. Later it's 20 million, and now it's under 10 million.
This will lead to problems for the replacement of generations. In 2023 in China, there may be only one working person for every non-working person.
Demography
specialists have been saying from the start that this is a bad idea, that the one-child policy can only lead to a demographic crisis in China. Demographers demanded the 2-child policy be kept in place for 2 or 3 decades, and that a 3-child policy should be introduced so that the actual natural growth is only slowed down, with generational replacement still ensured, and possibly later on, when women's birth rates fall naturally, to perhaps allow families to have more children if they want them. This would in no way affect the continuance of the demographic explosion and could even improve the demographic results.
But the Communist Party ignored these forecasts. This was partly due to incorrect demographic data being sent to Beijing.
Regional governments continue to report a large number of births, larger than should have resulted from the policy of limiting births. This was because of subsidies. The more people there were in a region, the more subsidies the region received from the central budget. This obviously motivated the local governments to report that more children were still being born there. And because they had more children, they should receive more money. And when the limits had been introduced, they motivated them to report more births in 1 year so that 1 year later they could say, look, we've been successful, we've reduced the number of births. But all this raised the statistics and led to the central government looking at it and seeing that too many children are still being born in the country.
The digitalization of databases changed the situation at the beginning of the 21st century. For the first time, the Chinese government had complete and reliable information concerning the country's demographic situation. However, even then, it turned out that it was difficult to make changes because the one-child policy had given some people huge power and led to the abuse of that power.
Z punktu widzenia systemu autorytarnego, w którym biurokrata ma
From the point of view of an authoritarian system where a bureaucrat has power over a citizen, their reproduction, their ability to have children has huge potential for corruption, for the abuse of power. So it's not strange that the local governments didn't want to get rid of this ability to impact on people, and in fact, to control their lives. And it didn't change until Xi Jinping. It's a kind of paradox that in accumulating power, building up his position so that while he wasn't perhaps the only ruler, he was the decision-making unit, and he was able to break down the resistance of this apparatus. Firstly, the one-child policy was changed to a two-child policy, so it was a return to the 1971 policy. Later, the limit was raised to 3 children, which led to a slight rise in births in 2016 to 2017, but after 2017 there was a return to a fall in the number of births, and last year it fell to below 10 million for the first time.
In the 2020s, it's likely that fewer than 100 million children will be born in China. That's a third of the number following the Great Famine. According to estimates from the UN, the population of China may fall to below 770 million by 2100. However, this estimate is based on there being 1,426,000,000 people in China in 2023, which is 16 million more than reported by China's National Bureau of Statistics. And even those figures may be inflated.
Pojawia się pytanie o wydłużenie wieku.
There is talk of raising the retirement age in China. It would be very unpopular. Due to the employment structure in China, there's a 3-tier retirement age. 50 for women employed in physical labor, 55 for women in clerical positions, and 65 for men, regardless of the nature of their work. The retirement age was set that low in order to free up jobs as quickly as possible so they could be taken up by young people just entering the labor market.
But the younger generation is better qualified than the older one, and they are looking for different jobs. It might be necessary to change the retirement age, but that in turn could cause social tension. So we need to ask, how will the demographic changes impact China's global aspirations?
W połowie lat 2000
Around about 2005-2006, in the middle of Hu Jintao's rule, a question appeared in the party elite, or the conception of one. Is the window of opportunity for China's strategic activity closing? I wonder how much that was linked to the fact that the data was coming to Beijing then, and the government there began to get a true picture of the Chinese population. Did they realize then that demographics will start to be a huge burden for the possibilities of the Chinese economy to develop, for its military potential and its global clout? And now China's starting to run out of time. Does it want to change the existing world order so that it's better for its aspirations and expectations, but also to adapt it to the changing domestic situation in China, including the demographic one? Do they want to move up the supply chain so that a shrinking but better qualified population can make more advanced products that don't require so much manpower in the economy? But they also have to change their international political position. Would this not mean that the window of strategic opportunity is truly closing for the Chinese elite if they want to change the world order to make it a better match for the changing situation inside China? In this context, we look at what Xi Jinping said about China's need to gain a better international position, to regain an international status appropriate for itself by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the Chinese People's Republic. Is this statement in fact influenced by the awareness that in the latter half of this century, the demographic problems will be so severe that after 2049, they will no longer be able to achieve their goals?
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this OSW documentary, why not watch our previous video on the consequences of a war in Taiwan? The link is available on screen now.